Hello Year 2, how are you? And welcome to today's reading lesson. Now today we are going to be carrying on with Fantastic Mr. Fox and looking at chapter 11, which is called A Surprise for Mrs. Fox. Now the reading skill that we're going to be looking at today is retrieval, and we have got our friend here, Rex the Retriever, to help us. Now remember, when we answer retrieval questions, the answers will always be in the text, and all we need to do is pick them out and put them into our answer. Now, when we're asked retrieval questions, normally they will include one of our 5 W's. So who, what, where, when and why, and sometimes they include how. And that will give us a clue to what we are looking for in the text. For example, if it asks us who, then we're looking for a person. If the question starts with why, we're looking for a reason. Or for example, if it starts with where, we're going to be looking for a place, aren't we? Now, like every other lesson, we're also going to be looking at some vocabulary. So while we're reading the chapter, we're going to stop at certain words and look at the words around it and see if we can work out its meaning. Now, before we do any work on retrieval or on vocabulary, I would like to see what you can remember from last lesson. So the chapter that we read last lesson, which was the end of chapter 10. Now, here you have 3 retrieval questions. What did Mr. Fox find in the shed? How did Mr. Fox choose the hens? And what did Mr. Fox ask the biggest of his small children to do? So I'd like you to pause the video now, and if you need to look back at the pages from last lesson, that is completely fine to refresh your memory. But if you can do these from memory, that's excellent. Okay, so pause the video now and write your answers to these questions. Okay, Year 2, so let's have a look at the answers together. Well, we can remember when the foxes were digging the tunnel, they found something hard above their heads, didn't they? And they pushed it up to see what it was inside. And Mr. Fox let out a shriek of excitement. Now, why did he let out a shriek of excitement? What had he found? Yes, you're right. He had found in the shed that the whole shed was teeming with chickens. Now, remember, teeming with means that it was full of. So he found that the whole shed was full of or teeming with chickens, and there were white chickens and brown chickens and black chickens by the thousands. So there were thousands of them, and therefore the shed was teeming with these chickens. Okay, now Mr. Fox had lots of options of chickens. Now, how did Mr. Fox choose the hens? Did he go for the hens that were the thinnest? Well, no, he didn't, did he? Because he was really hungry, wasn't he? So therefore, Mr. Fox chose 3 of the plumpest hens. Remember, if something's plump, it's nice and juicy, and the hens will have had lots of meat on them, and it's nice and soft, okay? So he chose 3 of the plumpest hens. Now, what did Mr. Fox, once he'd got the hens, ask the biggest of his small children to do? Can you remember? Well, yes, that's right. Mr. Fox asked him to run back to his mother with the chickens and tell her to prepare a feast, okay? So with all the chickens that they'd got, he wanted the biggest of his small children to ask Mrs. Fox to prepare a feast. So there we go. Well done if you've remembered all of that from chapter 10. So now let's move on to chapter 11. Now you will find these pages on your resource, Year 2 reading, 26th of February, resource 1. So if you want to follow along now, that is fine, but if you just want to listen for now, that is also fine, and you can look at the pages on your own later. So, chapter 11, A Surprise for Mrs. Fox. Now, we know what the surprise is, don't we? Because the small fox is running back to the house with all of the chickens that they've just caught. So, let's read the chapter. The small fox ran back along the tunnel as fast as he could, carrying the 3 plump hens. He was exploding with joy. Just wait, he kept thinking, just wait till Mommy sees these. He had a long way to run, but he never stopped once on the way, and he came bursting in upon Mrs. Fox. Mommy, he cried out of breath. Look, Mommy, look. Okay, here it says that he came bursting in upon Mrs. Fox. Okay, now what does it mean to burst into somewhere? Well, we know that the small fox is very excited because while he's running, he's saying, just wait till Mommy sees these. So he's got back home and he's really excited. So what do you think he's done with the door? Well, yes, he has burst in, which means to enter a room or a building suddenly and without warning. So Mrs. Fox wouldn't have known that the small fox was running back home with the hens. She was probably not aware of it at all, that it was going to happen. And because he was running so fast, because he was so excited, it was all very sudden, wasn't it? He just burst into the room. So burst in is a verb because it's describing an action. Now, some synonyms for burst in. Well, one synonym for burst in is barge in. So if you barge into a room, you open the door very quickly and there's no warning about it, okay? Now, in this story, the small fox bursts in to where Mrs. Fox is, the room in which Mrs. Fox is, to tell her all about the hens that he's got. But you can use burst in lots of different contexts. So, for example, in this sentence, I've got the lady burst into the room during a meeting. So the people in the meeting probably didn't realise that she was coming in. So it was without warning and it was all of a sudden, okay? She did it very quickly. The door flung open. Okay, so let's carry on reading. Where are we? Wake up and see what I've bought you. Mrs. Fox, who was weaker than ever now. Why was she weak? Well, yes, it was from the lack of food. Opened one eye and looked at the hens. Now, if we think about when we wake up in the morning, are we wide awake as soon as we wake up? No, we're not normally, are we? So she was probably still half asleep, and that's why she has only one eye open. So she's probably half asleep and doesn't really know what's happening. Her son has just burst into the room and she thinks maybe she's in a dream, maybe she's not in the dream. She doesn't know what's going on because it was all of a sudden and it was without warning. Now let's carry on reading. I'm dreaming, she murmured and closed the eye again. So yes, she thought it was all a dream because she was half asleep and she murmured this. Now, what does it mean if you murmur something? Well, she's half asleep and she thinks she's dreaming, so she's probably talking to herself, isn't she? So therefore, murmur means to say in a voice too quiet to be heard clearly, okay? Because she's saying it to herself because she thinks she's dreaming, she thinks she's going mad. So therefore, she's almost saying it so quietly because it's just to herself. She's not really saying it to anybody else. Now, murmur is a verb and it has two syllables. Will you clap them with me? 3, 2, 1, murmur. Fantastic. And yes, as I said, it means to say in a voice too quiet to be heard clearly. Now, we've had a look at the word mumble before. A mumble is a synonym of murmur. Okay, so if you mumble something, you say it very quietly so the other person can't really hear. And the same when you murmur. Now, some other synonyms are whisper and mutter, okay, all of which mean you're speaking so quietly that it's not very clear what you're saying to the other person. Now, obviously, some antonyms of this are shout and yell, because if you shout and yell at somebody, then they can definitely hear what you're saying because you're talking very loudly. Now, in this context, we are talking about Mrs. Fox has just woken up and she says, I'm dreaming. She murmured because she thinks she's just talking to herself. She thinks she's in a dream. Now, another usage with the same meaning, he was murmuring to himself. So again, he was talking to himself, not talking to anybody else, and therefore he was murmuring. So it was so quiet that somebody else wouldn't have been able to hear it very clearly. Okay, so she's woken up and she thinks she's in a dream, okay, because her son's just appeared with a load of chickens, load of hens. So let's carry on reading. You're not dreaming, Mummy. They're real chickens. We're saved. We're not going to starve. Mrs. Fox opened both eyes and sat up quickly. But, my dear child, she cried, where on earth? Boggis's chicken house number 1, spluttered the small fox. We tunnelled right up under the floor, and you've never seen so many big fat hens in all your life. And Dad said to prepare a feast. They'll be back soon. Okay, now here, earlier we said that Mrs. Fox murmured something, but here the small fox spluttered something. Okay, now he's very, very excited about these chickens, isn't he? So therefore, do you think he'd be able to get his words out? Well, no, because he's so excited. He's probably struggling, finding it hard to actually say what he wants to say. So therefore, splutter, which is a verb, and it has 2 syllables, clap them with me, splutter. It means to speak in a quick and unclear way when you're confused, when you're excited, or if you're embarrassed about something. So you struggle to get your words out. And in this context, the small fox is struggling to get his words out, probably all come out of his mouth in a jumble, because he's so excited about the chickens. Now you can use splutter in other contexts. So I said that it can be when you're confused, excited, or embarrassed. Now, when you're embarrassed, this could be a use of the word. So when I asked for an explanation, he just stood there spluttering, okay? So maybe he'd done something wrong and he was embarrassed and he didn't want to own up. He didn't want to tell the person that he had done something wrong. So therefore he was spluttering because he was struggling to get his words out because he didn't know what to say. Okay, so there we go. There is our verb, splutter, and it means to speak in a quick and unclear way when confused, excited, or embarrassed. So in this case, the small fox is very excited, isn't he? So let's carry on reading. The sight of food seemed to give new strength to Mrs. Fox. A feast it shall be, she said, standing up. Oh, what a fantastic fox your father is. Hurry up, child, and start plucking those chickens. Far away, down in the tunnel, the fantastic Mr. Fox was saying, now, for the next bit, my darlings, this one will be as easy as pie. All we have to do is dig another little hole from here to there. To where, Dad? Don't ask so many questions. Start digging. Okay, now earlier on here, when they are talking about the feast, Mrs. Fox tells the small fox to start plucking those chickens. Now, what does it mean to pluck a chicken? Well, we know that chickens have lots of feathers, don't they? Okay, do you think it's very nice to eat the feathers of a chicken? Oh, no, definitely not. So therefore, the small fox's job is to pluck the chickens. Now, pluck, which is a verb, means to remove something from something, okay? So in this case, Mrs. Fox is asking the small fox to remove the feathers, pluck the feathers off the chicken so that they can eat it. So some synonyms are remove and pick off. Now, in this case, Mrs. Fox, as I said, is asking her son to pluck the feathers off the chicken so they can eat it. But you could also say, I plucked a lemon from the tree. So I took a lemon off the tree, okay? I removed something from the tree and that was a lemon. So I plucked it off the tree. And yes, that is a verb because it's an action. So there we go. We have finished chapter 11. Chapter 11 is very short. The small fox in this chapter has run home. He's woken up his mother all of a sudden and he's told her about the chickens and that she needs to prepare a feast. But at the end, it doesn't sound like Mr. Fox is going home just yet, does it? Because he says that the next thing they need to do is as easy as pie, and all they have to do is dig another little tunnel from here to there. I wonder where there is. We'll find out in our next chapter. Well, now